Obese girl begged Mountain Man to let her stay. He refused until she did this. "Say yes, girl," Harold Bennett slurred, gripping his daughter's chin so hard her skin blanched. "A fat thing like you doesn't get a better offer than $500. Clara Bennett sat rigid at the end of the long, candlelit table, her hands twisted in her lap. The roast on the silver platter had gone cold. Her cheek still stung from the last slap. Across from her, Silas Crane dabbed the corner of his thin lips with a linen napkin, studying her the way a rancher might study a mare with a limp. "She'll do," Silas said at last. "Soft body, easy to break in. I'll take her." The room erupted in ugly laughter. Her brothers smirked over their whiskey glasses. Her mother stared at the wall, eyes glassy, as if she could step through the wood and vanish. "Stand up," Harold barked. "Thank Mr. Crane for buying you, Clara." Her throat burned. "I won't marry him," she whispered. The backhand came so fast she did not see it. She crashed to the floor, the world spinning, the chandelier above smearing into streaks of light. "You will," Harold roared. "No one else wants you. You eat too much, talk too much, breathe too much. You cost me money. Tonight, that ends. At dawn, you ride with him." Silas rose, boots scraping on the plank floor. He crouched beside her, his breath sour with liquor. "You run, girl. I'll find you. My hounds are very good at running down meat." The men laughed again. Clara stared at the knot in the floorboard and made no sound. Something inside her, something small and trembling, snapped free. That night, while the house lay drowned in whiskey and snores, she moved, bare feet, quiet hands. She took no money. There was none that was hers. She stole only her father's worn coat and a thin shawl. When she opened the back door, the wind slapped her like a living thing. The Colorado winter roared around the Bennett ranch. Snow ripped sideways across the dark fields. She stepped into it anyway. Hours later, the cold had climbed into her bones. Her heavy body dragged with every step, breath tearing in her chest. The world had become white and pain and the promise of nothing. She stumbled, fell to her knees, tried to rise and could not. "If this is where I end," she thought, "at least it is not in his bed." The storm howled. Then a shadow moved through the white. A tall figure in a fur-lined coat loomed above her, lantern light cutting a circle in the blizzard. Strong arms lifted her as if she weighed nothing. "Stay with me," a deep voice ordered. "You're not dying out here." Her vision blurred around his jaw, his beard, the fierce green of his eyes. Then everything went black. "Where are you listening from right now? Which town, which country, which lonely place in the world is sharing this firelight with us?" When Clara woke, she thought she had died, and the afterlife smelled of smoke and pine. A low fire flickered inside a stone hearth, casting amber light across rough-hewn walls. She lay on a narrow bed, piled high with furs, wrapped in warmth so thick it felt like a dream. The door creaked. A man's voice, deep and unhurried, said, "You're awake?" She turned her head. The stranger from the snow stood framed in the doorway. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, his beard black as coal, his eyes a strange, vivid green. Snow still dusted his hair. "Where am I?" she whispered. "My cabin, 3 miles from Elk Ridge. You were half frozen when I found you." He stepped closer, but stopped short of the bed, as if careful not to startle her. "Name's Nathaniel Blackwood. Folks call me Nate." Clara tried to sit. Pain lanced through her legs, and she sank back, wincing. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be here." "You'd be dead if you weren't." Nate knelt beside the hearth. stirred the coals, and poured steaming broth into a tin cup. "Drink this." Her fingers trembled as she took it. The heat seared her palms, and the scent, venison, onion, thyme, made her throat tighten with hunger. She drank, tears rising unbidden. "Thank you," she managed. He only nodded. His voice was steady, his movements sure, the kind of man used to silence and hardship. He spoke little while he checked the bandage on her foot, replaced the blankets, and then pulled on his coat again. "There's a blizzard coming down from the ridge," he said. "You stay put, I'll see to the stock." When the door shut behind him, the cabin seemed to breathe around her, timbers creaking, wind moaning through the chinks. She saw a shelf lined with tools, a rifle hanging above the door, and near the window a second cup beside his. He lived alone, yet left space for someone else. By nightfall he returned, stamping snow from his boots. Clara sat near the fire, clutching her shawl. I can work," she said quickly. "Clean, cook. I don't want to be a burden." He frowned, shaking his head. "You can't stand 5 minutes yet." "I can learn." For a long time he just looked at her, at the bruises fading along her jaw, the way she tried to hide her hands beneath the blanket. Then, quietly, "Who hurt you?" She stared into the flames. "No one that matters." "That's a lie." Her throat closed. "Please," she whispered, "don't make me go back." He said nothing for a moment, then turned to the window. Outside, the night howled white and merciless. No one's going anywhere until the storm breaks. 3 days passed before the wind eased. The world outside lay buried in silver silence. Inside, the cabin grew warmer, partly from the fire, partly from something else neither dared to name. Nate worked with wordless efficiency, chopping wood, patching leaks, melting snow for water. Clara watched him move, steady, deliberate, like every motion had a purpose. He reminded her of the great trees that bent but never broke. She, too, began to move again. She swept the floor, mended a torn sleeve she found among his things, cooked when her hands stopped shaking. Every small task felt like a piece of her old fear falling away. One evening, while she set the table, her hand brushed his as he passed her the bread. Both froze. "Sorry," she murmured. He cleared his throat. "Nothing to be sorry for." Their eyes met, her dark, his green, and for one breathless second the room seemed to still. The crackle of the fire was suddenly the only sound. She looked away first, cheeks flushed. "You live far from town." "Far enough," he said. "People talk too much down there." "What do they say?" "That I prefer bears to men." He smiled faintly. "Maybe they're right." Clara surprised herself with a quiet laugh, the first in years. "Then perhaps you've saved the wrong creature." "Maybe not," Nate said. The silence after that wasn't heavy. It was full. The next morning, she woke to find a folded coat at the foot of her bed. "Yours," Nate said simply when she asked. "The one you wore was no better than paper." She traced the stitches with her fingers, warmth flooding her chest. "You didn't have to." "I know." He looked away, reaching for his hat. "But I wanted to." She watched him step into the cold, and for the first time in her life, Clara Bennett felt something she had never dared to hope for: safety. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, another kind of weather was beginning. When the storm finally broke, the mountains gleamed beneath a hard blue sky. Snow blanketed the pines so heavy it bowed their branches. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, the only sign of life for miles. Nate packed his rifle and gear before dawn. Clara woke to the sound of him lacing his boots. "You're leaving?" "Going to check the trap lines," he said, tightening the strap around his shoulder. "I'll be back before sundown." "I can help." She blurted it before thinking. Nate turned, one brow raised. "You can hardly walk a mile in that snow." Clara swallowed. "Then I'll learn. Please, I don't want to sit here doing nothing." He hesitated. Her face was pale but resolute, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. Against his better judgment, he sighed. "All right, but stay behind me, and if you fall, you call out. Don't try to be brave." She smiled faintly. Too late for that. The air outside bit at her lungs, sharp and clean. Each step crunched through snow that reached her knees, but Nate slowed his pace so she could follow. He carried the heavier load, breaking a narrow trail for her. The forest was still, except for the wind sifting through the treetops. Rabbits darted across their path, their white fur vanishing into white world. Clara's breath came in short puffs. "Do you always live like this?" "Only way I know," Nate said. "The mountain gives what you earn, no one to lie to, no one to owe." She trudged beside him, thinking of her father's shouting, her brother's laughter, the house that had never felt like home. "It sounds lonely," she said softly. He glanced at her. "Sometimes it is." By midday they reached a small clearing where one of his traps lay half buried in snow. A fox, sleek and red, was caught inside. Nate knelt, murmured something under his breath, some quiet prayer or apology, before ending its struggle swiftly. Clara looked away, heart tight. "Doesn't it bother you?" "It should," he said. "When it stops bothering you, that's when you've lost your soul." They set up a small fire to rest. Nate handed her a strip of dried venison. "Eat." She hesitated, fingers brushing his as she took it. "Thank you for letting me come." He stared into the fire. "Didn't do it for thanks." "I know, but it means something." He looked up then, really looked at her, the wind-blown hair escaping her bonnet, the faint flush on her round cheeks, the determination in her eyes. She wasn't delicate or fragile as the women he remembered from town. She looked real, alive. Something shifted in his chest. The journey back grew colder as dusk crept in. The path twisted along the ridge where the snow had iced over smooth as glass. Clara's foot slipped. She gasped, teetering on the edge. Nate spun around and caught her just in time. His arms locked around her waist, pulling her back against him. For one long heartbeat, neither moved. Her breath came fast, clouding the air between them. "Got you," he murmured. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, steady and strong. Her fingers clutched his arm, not from fear but from something deeper, something that made her dizzy. When he finally released her, she turned, eyes wide. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said, voice rougher than before. "Just be careful." They walked the rest of the way in silence, though the silence wasn't empty anymore. It hummed with awareness. By the time they reached the cabin, twilight had fallen. Nate hung his coat near the fire while Clara poured melted snow into a pot. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred the stew. He watched her for a moment, the way she moved, awkward but earnest. "You did well today," he said. She looked up, surprised. "You mean that?" He nodded. "Most folks from town wouldn't last an hour up here." A small, shy smile curved her lips. "Then maybe I belong here." His chest tightened at the words. He wanted to tell her yes, she did belong, more than she knew, but the thought scared him. He turned away, poking the fire instead. Later that night, they sat at the table, the only light coming from the flames. The air between them felt fragile, like the space between two breaths. Clara spoke first. "Do you ever miss anyone, Nate?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw worked as if the words hurt. "Once," he said finally, "but the mountain takes what it wants." "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "Don't be. It's just how things are." But when he looked at her again, his eyes softened. "You should rest." "I'm not tired." "I am," he said quietly, "of pretending I don't care whether you stay alive till morning." The confession hung between them, fragile and startling. Clara's heart hammered. She wanted to say something, anything, but her voice failed her, so she reached out instead, laid her hand over his. For an instant, Nate froze. Then slowly, his fingers turned, enclosing hers. The touch was small, simple, but it set the room alight. Outside, the wind began to rise again, whispering against the logs. Inside, the two of them sat hand in hand, neither daring to move, afraid the spell might break. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, and in the heart of the wilderness, something that had been frozen in both of them began to thaw. Winter thickened around the cabin, but inside, life began to find its rhythm. The days were slow and filled with quiet work, and the silence between them changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but of people who understood each other without needing to speak. Each morning, Clara woke to the sound of Nate chopping wood outside. The steady thud of his axe echoed through the valley like a heartbeat. She would rise, wrap herself in her shawl, and light the stove, filling the room with the smell of boiling coffee and rising bread. Nate always came in dusted with snow, his breath steaming, his beard rimmed with frost. He'd nod to her in his usual gruff way, but his eyes would soften when he saw the table already set. "Didn't have to do that," he'd mutter. "I know," she'd say gently, "but I wanted to." They rarely spoke of the past. It hung between them like a closed door, and neither tried to open it. Instead, they built something new, slowly, quietly. One afternoon, Clara stood by the window watching Nate mend the fence. His coat stretched over broad shoulders, each motion deliberate and sure. She realized how different his presence felt, how every movement carried purpose, how he never raised his voice, never looked at her with judgment. When he caught her watching, she blushed and turned away, pretending to tidy the shelves. A moment later, the door opened, and he stepped in, carrying an armful of logs. "You shouldn't be standing by that cold window," he said, voice low. "You'll catch your death." She smiled faintly. "I was just admiring the snow." He set down the logs and looked at her. Really looked. The firelight danced over her face, softening the curves she had once been taught to hate. "It's not the snow I'd call beautiful," he said quietly. Her breath caught. Before she could reply, he turned toward the hearth, clearing his throat roughly. "Soup's ready?" "Yes," she whispered, her heart hammering. They ate together in silence, but every glance, every brush of a hand, felt charged with something neither dared to name. Over the next weeks, Clara took over the cabin as if it had always been hers. She swept the floor until it shone, stitched curtains from scraps of cloth, and planted herbs in wooden boxes by the window. Nate pretended not to notice, but he did. Every corner she touched seemed warmer, more alive. Even the air smelled different, less of smoke and leather, more of bread and pine, and her faint perfume of wild flowers and soap. He'd watch her hum softly while stirring the stew, and a peace he hadn't felt in years would settle over him. Sometimes, when she wasn't looking, he caught himself smiling. "Why are you smiling?" she asked one night, catching him off guard. He looked up from his carving knife. "Didn't realize I was." "You were," she teased. "You look almost happy." "Maybe I am." Her laughter filled the cabin, light and shy. "Then I'm glad." One evening, after a long day of mending fences, Nate returned with a sprained wrist. He tried to hide it, but Clara noticed immediately. "Let me see." "It's fine." She reached for his arm anyway, and he didn't resist. Her hands were warm against his skin as she pressed gently along the swollen joint. "You're lucky it's not broken," she murmured. He watched her from inches away, the way her brow furrowed, the gentleness in her touch. "You're good at this," he said. "My mother taught me some doctoring when I was little." "Your mother?" His voice trailed off, uncertain if he should ask. "She was kind," Clara said softly, wrapping his wrist with a strip of cloth, but too afraid to stand up to him. "I used to wish she'd take me and run." Nate's jaw tightened. "You deserve better than that." She smiled sadly. "Maybe so, but I have better now." Her words hung in the air. Nate's pulse quickened under her hands, and when she looked up, their eyes met. For a moment, neither breathed. He wanted to kiss her. The thought hit him like a blow, but the memory of Evelyn, her face, her laughter, her dying breath, rose like a ghost between them. He pulled his hand away, muttering, "Thank you?" Clara blinked, hurt flickering in her eyes. "Of course." He went outside after that, chopping wood long into the night, though there was already plenty stacked. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She greeted him with coffee, smiled, went about her chores. But something unspoken pulsed between them, something tender, dangerous. Later, as the day waned, she found him sitting on the porch, staring out at the snow. Without a word, she joined him. For a while, they just listened to the wind in the trees. "Do you ever wish things were different?" she asked finally. He hesitated. "Used to. Not anymore." "Why not?" "Because wishing doesn't change what's gone, only what's still here." He turned his head toward her. "And right now, what's here is enough." Her throat tightened. "For me, too." Their hands rested close on the bench. Slowly, deliberately, Nate turned his palm upward. Clara hesitated only a moment before laying her hand in his. He exhaled softly, as though something inside him had unclenched. They sat that way until the sun sank, painting the sky in gold and violet. That night, the wind rose again, but inside the cabin, the fire burned steady. Nate lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the faint rhythm of Clara's breathing from the other room. He thought of how she had come into his life like a snowstorm, unexpected, fierce, unstoppable, and somehow left warmth behind instead of ruin. He turned toward the window where moonlight pooled on the floorboards. His chest ached with a feeling he'd sworn never to feel again. Maybe she'll leave, he thought, when spring comes, when the road's clear. But even as he told himself that, he knew it wasn't what he wanted. In the room beyond, Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring his name. Nate closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness, "You're safe here, Clara. for as long as you need." And though she couldn't hear him, a soft smile touched her lips in the dark. Spring came late to the mountains that year. Snow still clung to the highest peaks, but green began to push through the thawing earth. Birds sang again in the mornings, and the air smelled of pine and wet soil. For Nate and Clara, life settled into quiet rhythm, simple, steady, almost peaceful. She had learned to milk the goat, mend the traps, and even shoot the small rifle he'd given her. He had learned slowly to let her laughter live in his cabin without feeling haunted by it. Yet, beneath that peace, something restless stirred in both of them. One morning, Nate returned from the trading post with supplies. Clara noticed the way his jaw was set tight, the tension in his shoulders. "What happened?" she asked. He dropped the sack of flour on the table. "Men in town have been talking." "About what?" "About a woman gone missing from down the valley. Said her family's been sending folks after her, offering money." Clara's stomach twisted. "My family?" He nodded grimly. The name Bennett came up. Her hands began to shake. "They're looking for me?" "Seems so. One man claimed her father swore she'd been taken by a trapper, by force." Nate's eyes hardened. "They're spreading lies." Clara's voice cracked. "They'll find us, won't they?" Nate didn't answer right away. "They might try." She sank into a chair, her face pale. "If they find me, he'll make me go back. I'd rather die." Nate crouched in front of her, his rough hands closing over hers. "No one's taking you anywhere. Not while I'm breathing." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't know him. He'll come with men, with guns. Then I'll meet them with mine." His voice was quiet, but there was iron in it. For days, tension hung over the cabin like a gathering storm. Nate began keeping the rifle close, his gaze always flicking toward the woods. He set new snares farther from the trail, made sure the horse was tethered near the door, ready to ride. Clara, though she tried to hide it, lived with a constant knot of dread. Sometimes she woke in the night, heart racing at the faintest sound of wind through the trees. One evening, she found Nate sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. His expression was distant, pained. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" Clara asked softly. He looked up, startled. "Who?" "Evelyn." He flinched as if struck. "Who told you that name?" "You did," she whispered. "In your sleep?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then he set his jaw, as if deciding something. "She was my wife." Clara nodded. "I thought so." "She died 5 years ago. Childbirth." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Doctor said it was her size. Her heart couldn't take it. Folks blamed me. Said I fed her to death. Said a woman like her shouldn't have tried to be a mother." Clara's chest ached at the pain in his voice. "That's cruel." He gave a bitter laugh. "Cruel's what people are best at. I buried her myself. Then I left town and never looked back." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm sorry, Nate." He didn't pull away this time. "You remind me of her, Clara. Not just how you look. The way you smile when you think no one's watching. The way you don't give up." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "Is that why you didn't want me to stay?" "Yes." He swallowed hard. "Because if something happened to you, I don't think I could bear it again." She squeezed his hand. "Then don't push me away. Protect me if you must, but let me stay." His voice was rough. "You make it sound easy." "It's the easiest thing in the world," she whispered. "Loving you." The words stunned him. For a moment, The fire's crackle was the only sound. Then he stood abruptly, walked to the door, and stared into the dark trees outside. "Nate," she said softly, "I'm trying to remember how to live with someone's love again," he murmured. "It's harder than you think." The next morning, while Nate was out chopping wood, Clara saw smoke rising from beyond the ridge, too thick, too black to be a campfire. Her blood ran cold. By the time Nate returned, she was standing at the door, pale and shaking. "They're here." He followed her gaze to the distant trail where several riders were moving through the trees. His face hardened. "Go inside," he said. "Nate—" "Inside, Clara." She obeyed, though her hands trembled. From the window, she watched him walk to the edge of the clearing, rifle slung across his shoulder, his posture steady and unyielding. The riders came into view. 4 men, led by one she recognized even from afar. Silas Crane. Her father rode beside him. When they halted, the valley went silent, except for the wind. Silas called out, voice sharp and mocking, "Blackwood, I hear you've been keeping what's mine." Nate's voice was calm. "Ain't nothing of yours here." "Oh, but it is." Silas dismounted, the snow crunching under his boots. "A runaway bride. I pay good money for her." "She's no one's property," Nate said evenly. Harold Bennett, red-faced from whiskey, shouted, "You thief! You took my daughter." "I saved her," Nate growled. "From you?" "Then you'll die for it," Silas sneered. He nodded to his men. Clara gasped as 2 rifles were raised. She ran to the door. "Nate!" Before she could reach him, Nate turned slightly, meeting her eyes over his shoulder. "Stay back, Clara." The first shot cracked through the air. Snow exploded near his feet. Nate fired once fast, sending one of the gunmen sprawling. Another shot whistled past him. He ducked behind a tree, returning fire with grim precision. Clara clutched the doorframe, praying, trembling. The smoke and echoes filled the valley. When it was over, 2 men lay motionless in the snow. Silas cursed and scrambled onto his horse, retreating with Harold close behind. Nate lowered his rifle slowly, chest heaving. Clara ran to him, falling to her knees beside him. "Are you hurt?" He looked down at her, his expression softening. "No, but they'll be back." She gripped his hand. "Then we'll face them together." He brushed a lock of hair from her face, his eyes full of something fierce and certain. "You're not going anywhere, Clara. You're mine now, and I'll protect you till my last breath." The wind carried away the gunpowder's sting, leaving only silence and the scent of pine. The mountains went still after the gunfire, but peace never returned. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Nate knew Silas Crane wasn't the kind of man to accept humiliation. He would come back, with lawmen, maybe bounty hunters, and next time, words wouldn't stop him. He worked through the night fortifying the cabin, reinforced the shutters, barred the doors with thick oak beams, loaded every rifle and pistol he owned. Clara begged him to rest. "You've done enough. Please, Nate." He shook his head, jaw set tight. "They won't take you. Not alive. Not while I can stand." She moved closer, her hands trembling as she touched his arm. "I don't want you to die for me." He looked at her, the firelight flickering across his face. "I'm not dying for you, Clara. I'm living for you. That's different." Tears blurred her vision. She wanted to tell him she loved him again, but the words caught in her throat. He leaned in and kissed her instead, rough, urgent, the kind of kiss that feels like a promise before battle. By noon the next day, The sound of hooves echoed up the valley. Clara saw the dust rising first, then the glint of metal. 5 riders this time. One wore the sheriff's badge of Elk Ridge. Nate stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Clara stood behind him, clutching her father's old coat around her shoulders. The sheriff called out, "Nathaniel Blackwood, you're harboring a fugitive woman and are accused of assault and murder. Lay down your gun and come peacefully." Nate's voice carried steady through the cold air. "The only crime I've done is keeping her safe." Silas Crane rode forward, smirking. "You think you can keep her, Blackwood? You think she loves a beast like you? She belongs to me." Clara stepped out from behind Nate before he could stop her. Her voice rang clear and fierce. "I belong to no one. You bought me like cattle, and my father sold me like trash. But I am free now. I will never go with you." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Bennett, if that's true, then say it plain. Are you here of your own will?" "Yes," she said, "and I'd rather die here than return to that man." Silas's face twisted. "You ungrateful sow!" Before he could finish, Nate raised his rifle. "You'll watch your mouth." Silas spat into the snow. "You can't shoot me in front of the law." "Then you better start praying he leaves before I do," Nate said quietly. The sheriff, sensing the storm, held up a hand. "Enough! Mr. Crane, this isn't how we settle things. If she says she's here of her own will, you've no claim on her." "You'll regret crossing me, Sheriff," Silas snarled. "Maybe," the sheriff said, spurring his horse, "but I won't stand for murder." Silas hesitated, then lunged for his pistol. The world seemed to slow. Nate's rifle flashed once. The crack echoed through the valley. Silas staggered, dropped his gun, and fell backward into the snow. For a long time, no one moved. The sheriff dismounted, knelt beside the fallen man, and after a moment looked up. "He's gone." Nate lowered his rifle, his breath heavy in the cold. "He left me no choice." The sheriff nodded solemnly. "I'll say as much in my report. You did what you had to." He mounted again, tipped his hat toward Clara. "You've got a man who'd die for you, ma'am. Make sure he doesn't have to." When they were gone, the valley was quiet again. Clara walked to Nate and threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "It's over," he murmured, holding her tight. "You're safe now." She looked up at him through tears. "Then marry me, Nate. Marry me today, before the world finds another way to take you from me." He cupped her face in his hands. "You sure?" "I've never been sure of anything." He smiled, softly, finally at peace. "Then by the mountains and the sky above us, I'll be yours." And right there in the quiet clearing, with the snow melting into spring around them, Nathaniel Blackwood and Clara Bennett sealed their vow, not before a preacher, but before the earth itself. The mountains had never looked gentler. Snow retreated into the shadows of the trees, and wildflowers crept across the clearing where blood and fear had stained the ground only days before. Life, as always, returned quietly. Nate and Clara spent the morning preparing without a word. There was no preacher, no music, no ring of guests. Only the mountain, the wind, and the soft hush of the pines. Clara wore a simple white dress she'd sewn from flour sacks, her hair braided and crowned with tiny yellow blossoms. Nate had shaved and trimmed his beard, though his hands trembled as he buttoned the clean shirt she'd pressed for him. When he turned, she stood in the doorway, sunlight pooling around her like gold. His heart stuttered. "You're beautiful," he whispered. She smiled shyly. "You're not so bad yourself." They walked together to the old oak at the edge of Timber Hollow, the place where he had once built his first trap line, the place that had seen his loneliness and now would witness his joy. Nate took her hands, calloused against soft, and for a moment neither spoke. The forest held its breath. "I've no church words to say," Nate murmured finally, voice low but steady. "Only this. You came into my life when I thought I was done with living. You showed me that even a broken man can be worthy of love." Clara's eyes glistened. "And you taught me that I was never broken to begin with. You gave me safety when I didn't believe I deserved it. You gave me a home." He smiled, a real unguarded smile. "Then by the trees that shelter us and the sky that watches, I take you as my wife." "And I take you as my husband," she whispered. He bent down and kissed her, slow and sure, as sunlight filtered through the leaves above them. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers, and for the first time the mountains seemed to smile. That evening the cabin glowed with firelight and laughter. Clara had baked bread. Nate had hunted a hare, roasted it crisp and golden. They ate together at the rough-hewn table, hands occasionally brushing, eyes lingering longer than before. When the plates were cleared, he took her hand and led her to the doorway. Outside, the night was quiet, stars scattered like silver dust. He pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and murmured, "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood." Her eyes shone. "I've been home since the night you found me in the snow." They stood together, the cold forgotten, the fire behind them warm and steady. Somewhere far below, a wolf howled, and its echo drifted through the valley like a blessing. Inside that little cabin, surrounded by endless wild and quiet grace, their love finally belonged to the earth, to the mountains, and to each other. Stories like theirs remind us that love isn't born in ballrooms or under chandeliers. Sometimes it begins in a storm, in fear, in two wounded souls who simply refuse to let go. Clara and Nate found their home not in comfort, but in courage and in each other. Maybe that's all any of us are searching for, a place where someone looks at us and says, "You're safe now. You can stay." If you're hearing this, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Which corner of the world shares this quiet firelight with us? And if you still believe in love, don't leave. The next story is waiting for you.